So thank you so much for the intro. I am Laura. This is my email. Please email me if you have any questions. I really welcome it. I've spent a long time working with a whole bunch of different student groups from CMU through Project Olympus. I really love hearing all the different ideas, and I feel like kind of keeps me sharp because you guys always come to me with things I've never thought about before. So please email me. I've spent about the last 10 years in the startup world, worked across financial tech, education tech, construction tech, most recently climate tech. I also spent about 2 years doing consulting for different companies across the country. And I got to work with about 50 great different startups between like pre-seed to Series B. So some of the things we're going to talk about today, I got to see in action in a lot of different contexts. But they're all a little bit different. So we can talk about how they apply to you. So I've got this sort of extended metaphor through the presentation of science and art. And the way that I'm using that is that science is sort of like the fundamentals, like what are the levers that we're going to learn about that you can use in your revenue plans. And then the art is actually what's more interesting is all the interesting ways that you then apply that to your own companies. So we're going to start with the revenue plan levers and how to make an annual revenue plan. And then we're going to go deep on the value lever, and we're going to talk about pricing and some of the different examples of how interesting pricing can get when you start to play around with that art side. So at some point in your entrepreneurial journey, you are going to be given a goal that feels completely unreachable. So maybe that comes from you and you're saying, I'm going to sell 20,000 products or tours next year. I'm going to sell 20,000 tours. That's a lot. Or maybe you have exchanged some funding for a board seat and you have someone on your board who is saying, I want you to sell $1 million next year. You think that is not possible, but you have to make a plan for how that could be possible. And you got to figure out what engineering resources do I need? What sales resources do I need? Do I need to spend dollars on marketing? And then when I have been spending those dollars, what am I expecting to get back in return in terms of sales? This is going to show you sort of how to put together one of those plans. I think most commonly they're done in an annual planning basis. You'll hear that a lot, but actually when you're pre-revenue or like really early revenue, you're going to make these all the time as your goals change and scenarios change, and you want to know how to get there. So every revenue plan has a few of the same levers. I've seen a lot of these levers in action at different types of companies. And even though everyone is different, I've seen that there are some things that are similar and they hold true across different organizations and industries. Two types of levers in my mind. I think there are revenue side levers. So they affect your top line, and pulling or pushing on these levers depends on how much money you're going to make. And then on the cost side, these levers affect your bottom line. So this is how much of the money that you make are you going to take home? And you'll see with our different scenarios, the revenue and the cost side levers are connected. And it makes sense. Like we're going to go over the example of it takes money to make money, right? Like you can't have one good thing without spending a little bit on the other side, and vice versa, actually. So these are the ones we'll go through, and we'll go through one by one. So the first revenue lever to be aware of in your plan is volume. So really simple, how many customers are entering the top of my marketing funnel? When you're pre-revenue and you don't actually have any customers, you should be thinking about your total addressable market, your ideal customer profile. So who of that total addressable market do I actually want to purchase in the end? And if you're post-revenue and you're already out to market, maybe you're thinking about top of the funnel metrics such as ad clicks, website visitors, store visits. How many people can I actually reach with my messaging? I did a little bit of a review before people started filtering in. So maybe just a show of hands. Is anyone in this room post-revenue? No, you. Post-revenue? Okay. Everybody else pre-revenue or other, or just like considering, thinking about things. Okay. So for the post-revenue, do you mind if I pick on you? Is that okay? In the red jacket, is that okay? For post-revenue, are you to market with some of this marketing pieces yet, or what would you say is your top of the funnel for volume for your company?
So, we're weird and hybrid.
Okay.
So
Okay.
that means that we have product and service, right?
Got it.
You
Yeah.
have written word, have service to people, right?
Mhm.
So we are kind of how we're measuring psychological in our webinars, right? In
Yeah.
person, not so much marketing.
Okay, great example though. Yeah, webinars is a great way to reach people at the top of that funnel and even in person. I think actually a lot of companies that are newer to revenue, the most efficient way to spend your dollars is with people because you get to learn through having those sales conversations. It doesn't make any sense to take out an ad if you don't know what to say in that ad that's actually going to convince people to come down the marketing funnel. So that's a great example. And when you think of volume in your plan, you might think of how many people are we reaching? Like how many registrants and attendees do I have of those webinars? How many different sales meetings have I had over a period of time? Next lever, again, really simple. How much is each customer worth to you? So usually when we talk about this in a plan, we're talking about an average of cost across everyone. We're actually going to spend a lot more time with this lever as we go deep with our pricing conversation because there are so many different permutations to how you think about value. In this silly little example, each one of these customers is worth a different amount to us. You might see that expressed as 5K in the doc, but if you're thinking about your plan levers, if your plan levers, value is actually something that you can move up, but you can also move down strategically. Sometimes companies really want to take advantage of the down market, and because the down market has more volume. And that's another example of how these levers connect to each other. As you go up in value, you have fewer and fewer customers in your total addressable market that can actually meet that value for what you're selling. So for the short term, when we talk about value, that's probably everyone in this room. We're talking about first purchase value. When you start to get years into your business and you start to see maybe repeat purchases or renewed subscriptions or things like that, that's when we can start talking about LTV, which is your lifetime value. Sometimes LTV, it's a very like academic metric. So sometimes you're asked for it in a setting like a CMU business school project. In practice, it is impossible to calculate. When you're pre-revenue, it's basically throwing a dart against the wall. So my recommendation is to really keep it to that short-term first purchase when you're making this first plan. Okay, next one is time. So how long will it take you to convert each prospect to a customer? So your prospect enters the top of your funnel, maybe they attend a webinar or they click on an ad. And then how long is it going to take them to purchase? This is really important when you're figuring out your revenue plan, because if you set a revenue plan, it's usually time bound. It's how much money are we going to make this year? If it takes you 6 months to make a sale, you have to make all of that top of the funnel effort in your first 6 months in order to get those sales by the end of the year. So it's a really important thing to keep in mind, something a lot of people forget when they come up with these plans. It's also a really cool KPI if you think about it like a lever, right? If we want to reduce the time that it takes a customer to go from prospect all the way down to a signed purchase, that could have a really big impact on your business and the amount of revenue that you're making. You might hear it called average sales cycle, deal duration. And yeah, it's important because it's time bound. I know a whole bunch of folks are pre-revenue, but do you have a guess for your product as to what your time is from prospect to customer? Hard to say. Yeah, hard to say. It gets shorter, right? So the first sale that you have, it's going to be probably the longest because you're getting everything right. Does anyone have a sense of what this time looks like for them? Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, good one.
So, what I noticed, like, room, right, there is a lot of times to begin to approach them,
Mhm.
right? That's the strategy goes from this outbound for us, our normal outbound is like 6 to 18 months. How much money?
Yep. Yeah, I like the metaphor of net fishing. So inbound is kind of like net fishing. You put out all your marketing and who knows what's going to come into the net? Sometimes things that work and sometimes things that don't. Outbound is more like spear fishing, where you have a prospect, you go after that prospect. It tends to be that inbound, once they come to you, it's faster. But an outbound is a little bit slower, but you have to wait for them to come to you, which can take a long time. And is kind of in practice very difficult to quantify because you don't know what's the first ad that influenced them. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. All right. Next one is the rate. So we talked about the volume, what's coming in the top of the funnel, but the rate is of the prospects in the marketing funnel, how many will you win? This is where I'd say most like mature scale-ups are spending most of their time in their annual plan is how do we win more of the top of our funnel and make that funnel shape a little shallower. So it's usually expressed as a rate. So you might say, we are going to convert 20% of, that would be amazing. We're going to convert 2% of the contacts in our marketing funnel into customers. And yeah, there's a whole bunch of things that you can do with this. When you do have your sales funnel figured out, your marketing funnel figured out, doing things like trying to answer your customers' questions more efficiently within that marketing funnel, or helping them understand the value, being really strategic with how you show your competitive value against the other competitors in your industry, and just making that an easier decision to make. Next one is retention. I have talked to a couple people that are doing software products, just hands-on software. 2 software, 3 software. Okay, so this is really big with software, but I would say it also comes into play when you're talking about physical goods that you're expecting people to purchase again. So retention is of your customers, how many will you retain in the next billing cycle? Are you going to resubscribe to Netflix next year? Like that sort of cycle. Sometimes we have a product that might be like a flash in the pan product. They want to try it out and then they never purchase it again. We've all been consumers of products like that. We don't want that for our businesses. And the way that you prevent that from happening is you really look at the value that you're delivering your customer and you're making sure to deliver it all the way through the customer life cycle and into the next customer life cycle. You can look at this either by number of customers left. If you're a B2C company, that's usually a good way to look at it. You can also look at it by dollars that you are losing year over year. There's no right way to do it. Companies decide to do both. Okay, so that's our 5 revenue levers. If we just want to review, we talked volume, so number of customers in the top, value, how much is each one worth to you, the time that it takes them to go through that marketing funnel, the rate, how many of them are becoming customers, and then how many of them will keep coming back to you in the next cycle are our revenue side levers. And then on the cost side, whoops, first one that we have is capacity. So this is super important to remember as you start to, especially as you start to spend money with your company. The most expensive thing that you spend is time. People are usually the biggest line item expense, but if you're not paying yourselves, sometimes it's really hard to remember that your time is the biggest line item expense because whatever you're doing means that you cannot be doing something else. There's big opportunity costs to where you spend your time. So when we're thinking about capacity and you're thinking about maybe a sales-driven structure, like we heard about in the back, you are going to be limited in how many sales meetings you do by how many people you have available to do those meetings. You might want to increase your capacity by bringing on another person into the business. But if you do that, you're going to be affecting your cost because cost, it's going to affect how much money you can take home in the end. So even if bringing someone on means that you can take twice as many sales meetings, also means that your cost is probably doubled to get there. So there is capacity is one side of that coin and efficiency is the other. And when you want to bring someone on, you always want to make sure that 2 people is actually more efficient than the sum of their parts. And by doing things together or maybe standardizing things across 2 people, making learnings together, you can actually make yourselves more efficient. So efficiency is how much output per dollar can you expect? In this example, just very simple. If you have 200K earned by sales, 100K spent by sales, you've got a 2 sales efficiency multiple. There's a whole bunch of industry standard beliefs about what a good sales efficiency multiple is. You might run across that. If you're pre-revenue, if you're in your first 2 or 3 years of a startup, don't worry about it. It's going to be through the roof, like the wrong way. And that's actually okay because you're learning and you're spending a whole bunch of your capacity trying to figure out what makes you efficient so that once you find it, you can really start to go. But for right now, for you guys, I would not make this a key KPI that you want to improve. Does that make sense to everybody? Is anybody working on a multi-person team? You are? Do you see the results of capacity versus efficiency on that team?
Yeah, time is obviously, but I think time to look as we have no time, go a lot faster.
Yeah.
A lot faster. So we're pretty efficient, but yeah, we have no time.
Yeah, absolutely. But there's trade-offs, right? It costs money. Yeah. I saw a hand right behind in the white shirt. Are you feeling that? No? No? Okay. So that's to review our cost side levers. So we have capacity and we have efficiency. And the art, to extend my metaphor, is how you pull those levers when you're making your plans. So first one I alluded to at the beginning, if we talk about some different scenarios for how we pull these levers. Oh, that's bad formatting. Horrible formatting. Sorry about that. It takes money to make money. So if you want to increase the volume, so the number of customers number of prospects that you're able to reach at the very top of your marketing funnel, that might mean that you're spending more in marketing dollars, or maybe you have added a headcount so that you can do more webinars or do more in-person sales events. That's going to decrease your efficiency because you're now spending more per the amount of money that you're making today. You would only make this investment if you believe that in the future, this is going to come back to normal, right? Because you're spending money in order to make money. But in your plan, especially because the plan is time bound, sometimes you have to make sure that, you know, as you're setting out your levers, that everyone knows that this is what we're doing. You're going to say, this year, this metric won't look ideal, but that's okay because we're spending money to make money. And the key metric that we're going to take a look at is the volume on that side. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. Another one, maybe less relevant for most companies in the room, but there is a fallacy when you are hiring people that adding another salesperson means that everything will double, especially when you're looking at a time-bound sales revenue plan. This is not the case. It just never is the case in practice, because when you bring on a new salesperson, they have to get spun up. They need to get trained up in what they're doing. They have to build their sales funnel. All of that takes time. And so what you see typically is your capacity goes up, and then immediately the value per customer goes down. Your time goes up. So bad, it takes more time to get through the funnel, and the rate of how many of those customers come through the funnel goes down. That's actually okay. Maybe we're just making investments in our capacity this year with the expectation that these things are going down. But when these things go down, maybe you want to make sure that the other levers are still working. What we want to prevent here is that, let's say you make a plan that you want to sell $10,000 next year. You account for this, but you don't account for that. That's going to make sure that you don't hit that $10,000 in the coming year. Any questions on this one? No? Okay, and last example that we have here is pivoting to a higher paying customer. So maybe you have a product that is, to pick on you for a sec, maybe we have a product tours software. Maybe you're focused on neighborhood historical societies, but actually you think, I want to increase my value, and the neighborhood societies can only go up so much. So I actually want to pivot to the MoMA, and I only want to go MoMA or bust. So that's going to increase your value, but there's very few MoMAs, right? So it's going to decrease the volume, and it's going to increase the time that it takes to actually sell the MoMA versus selling a historical society. A lot of times you want to make that pivot. It's a good thing for your business, but if you're going to make your plan, you have to keep these other two levers in mind. Otherwise, you're going to miss on the money that you think that you're going to make in that year. And I mentioned this at the start too, but it's easy to see the value in pivoting to MoMA. It's much harder to see the value if you're at MoMA to pivot to the historical societies. Both are valid strategies that are worth taking a look at. And I think looking at your plan in the terms of these levers sometimes makes that a little bit easier to see. All right, so the science here quantifies and the art qualifies. I would say like understanding what the levers are is step one in making up this plan. But if you're not applying them correctly, or you're not applying them in interesting, creative ways to your actual plan, it's you're not going to get the outcome that you really want. All right, before we go into value, does anybody have questions, or does anyone see maybe interesting ways to apply some of this to the companies that you have in mind? No? Okay. All right, so we're going to then go into value, and then I'm going to start picking on people. So we have value here, how much money per customer. You saw my very simplistic kind of silly slide. Pricing is a lot more complicated than that. We do a lot of talking with student groups, especially on how to set this price point, but it's less what the, is it $5? Is it $10? And it's a lot more like, what is your pricing philosophy as a company? I like to break it down into these three buckets. So the first one is your price point. So this includes, do you want to have cost plus pricing? So you have your raw materials and you say, I'm just going to charge 25% above what my raw materials cost me. I wouldn't recommend that unless you are selling a commodity, but it's a pricing strategy. We also have value pricing, much more common, especially in software, where you're taking a look at how much your customer values your product, and then where can we set the price point accordingly to that. We also have competitive pricing. You can anchor against where your competitors are pricing or where they are not pricing. Obviously, dynamic pricing, we all know Uber. Psychological pricing, is it $99 or is it actually $100? And there's a couple other pieces here, but they all get you to like the number of the price. I think the number of the price is obviously very important, but it's not as important as these other two, especially price packaging. So packaging is it a subscription like Netflix, or is it software in a box, which I have come to understand that no one remembers. I feel like I might be yeah, you remember, Allison remembers, but I remember being a little kid and going into Circuit City with my parents and they bought Microsoft Excel in a box. Like, is that how you're going to buy it? Or currently like today with Microsoft where you have a subscription, when you have that subscription, what about freemium models? What about free trials? What about tiered pricing where you have like starter, professional, enterprise? And do the starter, professional, enterprise give you more throughput, or do they give you more features, or like how does all of that work? And actually the price packaging has many more permutations and is more important when it comes to, is my customer going to buy ultimately, than the price point, in my opinion. And then price positioning, I've got a slide on this to illustrate the importance here, but price positioning is great when it's very important in terms of when the customer sees the price for the first time. So are they learning about your price on your website? My rule of thumb is if your product is more than $1,000 a month, don't put it on your website, unless it's like very standard and everyone knows what the price is. But you can really stick or shock people no matter what you're selling if it's more than $1,000 a month. So I recommend making sure that they learn about that pricing from a person where it can be pitched in the context of the value that you're delivering. But maybe they're learning about it. I don't know. You want to make sure they're not learning about it from competitors. Maybe they're learning about it from flyers. Maybe they're learning about it at the very end of the sales price. A lot of companies like gate it until they've got you at the end, but customers hate that. Yeah, so that can also be very important. But these are sort of the three ways that I break that down. Does that make sense to everybody? Any questions on that? Question? Say one more time.
Mix and match also, like I've seen a software point of view,
have a freemium model, they try things and then it's what they try to subscribe to it, like some features are gated behind more tables.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
you have this AI thing, everything else is $5, but then you have, if you want this thing that you really like, that's $10 also.
100%. Yep. Question is, can you mix and match? Absolutely. And actually, that's why there's like infinite possibilities with pricing, packaging, and we interact with that as consumers all the time. But also as consumers, I think we recognize there's a level of complication beyond which it doesn't matter how good the product is. I don't want to deal with this, you know. There's also level of price point. Is Netflix approaching it? I don't know, but they keep upping the price on me every year, right? And I like the price packaging. That works for me. I don't have to think about my subscription, but I think I'm paying almost $20 a month right now for Netflix, and that maybe that's not where I want to be going. But yeah, so you can mix and match each piece of this for sure. Okay, I really like these pricing resources. I highly recommend going to them. I'm going to show you a slide from this first link that I love. I show it all the time, like always on my decks. And then Profitwell is a company that sells pricing consulting and pricing like software. I don't think anyone in this room needs the consulting, not to undersell their consulting, but you're just not at the stage for it yet. But their blog and newsletter is fantastic as a way to learn about some of these pricing methods that we're talking about, like cost skimming, penetration pricing, that kind of thing. The next few slides go through examples of how we can apply some of the art to pricing. They're a little bit disjointed, but I actually think they're good examples in order to illustrate like how different pricing can look across different pieces. What I would recommend is to take what interests you from the next section and go back and research it on these slides, because this is or on these resources, because this is actually, I think, where the best information it can come from. The first thing about pricing has nothing to do with pricing. I'd say like the first art of pricing is about knowing your customer. So who in this room, even if you're pre-revenue, whatever, has spoken to a prospective customer? Excellent. Yes. If you're part of CMU's programs, you absolutely should be doing that. We like at Project Olympus, at least, we base a lot of our curriculum around customer discovery and making sure that you're going out and speaking to your customers. If you can put yourself in your customer's shoes and you know what's important to them in the context of this purchase, but also in the context of other purchases, right? Like in what they actually care about, you are going to set a much better price point. You're going to make better price packaging decisions and better price positioning decisions. So actually, I would say the art of pricing has nothing to do with dollars and cents. It actually has to do with interviewing your customers and really understanding what works for them. When you talk to your customers about pricing, it is very hard to ask the question, how much would you pay for this? It's like an impossible question to ask and for them to answer, right? Like it's to say like, how much would you pay for a shoe? I would not pay a lot for, for maybe a plastic flip-flop, but I would pay a lot for a Louboutin. And like, what is the actual difference between those things? Or I'd pay a lot for a Nike, but not for a Skechers. What is the difference, right? So in order to get to a better understanding of that question, you need to ask your customer more interesting questions, like, how much would it cost you to do this yourself? Or what is the value to you that I'm delivering? And not just in terms of, for example, to take the tours software, if to do it themselves, they probably have to hire somebody to do product tours. And even then, could they do it at the level of scale that you're offering? Certainly not, right? How many people would they actually have to hire to do that? A lot. How much value are you delivering to them? Could be how many people are getting to experience that wouldn't have gotten that before, right? And what is the actual value to them of that? Maybe it's actually also the value that they save. I worked for a company that was in the construction tech space. Memorial Day is really big in construction because it's like when it gets nice out and everything, and you want to spend time with your family, but also it's when a lot of companies break ground for the first time because it's nice. And our software was able to save this guy enough time that he could go spend Memorial Day with his family. That's huge value to this customer that we would not have understood had we not taken the time to do some of those interviews. So don't ask what you would pay for this. Ask more interesting questions when you're asking about pricing. Does that resonate with anybody, or has anybody asked those questions, gotten interesting answers? No? No? I thought I got you. No. Okay. That's fine. All right. So this is an example about price positioning. So when does your customer hear the price? Got a couple of options here. One example is they hear about the price on the website. So like I said, my rule of thumb here is if you're selling a product for less than $1,000 a month, it might be worth considering putting that price on the website if it makes sense for your. If it's more than 12,000, I might consider not showing that and giving yourself an opportunity to pitch in the context of value when they hear that price. Sometimes we share it on the first call. So it's if we're doing like a sales motion, you have like a first discovery call with that customer, and that's when they're asking you, well, how much does it cost? And then you tell them. Sometimes we do it via materials after the first call. So we say, just like a really common salesy thing to say is like, all the pricing is custom. Let me learn more about your business, and then I'll let you know what that pricing is. Is that true? Most times not. And we know that as consumers, right? But it allows you to give the opportunity for them to learn about pricing following that call via materials. And then sometimes it's after the value. And actually your pricing is super custom because maybe you have services like you do you're involved in your product, and you actually can't know what services that customer will need until you do learn more about what they're trying to purchase. So then you learn about it after the value. In general, the higher the price point, the further right, and the lower the price point, the further left. But it really depends on the product that you're selling and the sort of like competitive landscape that you're in. Does anyone have a website? Websites, excellent. Do you have pricing on your website? No pricing yet. No. Okay. No pricing because we're not sure what the pricing is, or no pricing because we want it to come in and you want it to go this way. Yes. Okay. And what about you guys?
Not sure.
We're not sure. Okay. So maybe one slide previous, right? It comes from asking all those questions and then probably selling it a whole bunch of times and figuring out what the price point is. For those that don't yet have a website, do you feel like you know where you might fall on this? Yeah. Okay, this is the slide that I love from scienceofrevenue.com. Highly recommend going there after this. These sorts of visuals, the site is full of them, and they make it really easy to understand these different pricing concepts. So I like this one because it talks about how price connects to your business model and to your risk. So all the way on this side, we have paying upfront for your product. This is like Microsoft Excel in a box. What's great about that is that as a company, I have no risk. I've sold it to you and you bought it upfront. And now we never have to talk to each other again because you just gave me all the money. So I don't have any risk, but you as the consumer have all the risk because you have purchased Microsoft Excel in a box and you don't know if it's going to work for you or how that's going to work. Hardware, physical goods are really good examples of those sorts of pay upfront products where the consumer actually holds all the risk. Most products like that have perpetual ownership. If you bought something from me, like a physical thing, I'm not going to come and take it away from you at some point. As we move up towards the center line, we're starting to see software as we would recognize it today, where we have either multi-year licenses, annual licenses, quarterly licenses, monthly, weekly, daily, hourly licenses. These are all the subscriptions that we would recognize. So this is Netflix. I'm sure we have annual subscriptions to something that I'm not thinking of. CRMs are annual subscriptions. LinkedIn is an annual subscription, a hefty one, very annoyingly, but we love it. It's got good value. All the way down here to usage. So usage is I'm going to pay for something for how many times I have throughput through that thing. Like thinking of like cloud software, where like it's like how many GPUs you're using of that cloud software, that would be usage. And then all the way down to impact. This is like your financial advisor. They say, you're gonna pay me 2% of what I save you, or what I make you rather. This is impact. As a company at impact, you have all the risk. Customer has no risk. So that's sort of the line that we're going on. Where you set this is really important for the type of product that you're making and how much risk you're willing to accept with the type of product that you're making. And I really like this because I think it does a great job. It's doing something else. It's showing us over time how we have moved business models. So in the 1990s, everything's pay up front. We moved through the 2000s, through the boom of SaaS, all the way down into impact in the 2010s. And then all the companies said, actually, this is really hard. And my product isn't good enough for this. So now we've all kind of bounced back into our SaaS annual subscriptions there. But just an interesting way to visualize some of the pricing packaging methods. Is this resonating for folks? Is this like bubbling up any ideas for people? Yes.
For product analysis, we're very early
Mhm.
to discover what price points customers would be willing to pay. Right now, we have it usage, but we intend to develop it where it's like a quarterly model.
Yeah.
We actually start that.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I did. But it's sort of sacred price.
Yeah. It's also interesting for a product like yours because they might not know what throughput to expect, right? You're giving them access to something that they've never had access to before, and they might not be able to figure out how many credits they need. At the construction tech company that I worked at, our product was, we took drone imagery and we turned it into 3D digital models of construction sites so that you didn't have to go out and survey the site by hand. We had credits, so you could use up to 15 credits, which is basically like a monthly survey per year, plus like maybe you mess up a couple times. Credits, but we started this company in 2013-ish, and drones over the course of 2013 to 2022 just exploded. So customers were in this situation where they say, the company just bought 6 drones to go across lots of different construction sites. I have no idea how many times I'm going to put the drone in the air to do my credits. We also had situations where we had like a construction site in Anchorage, and they're like, well, we only have X many sunny days a year. How could I buy credits from you for a year without knowing what that's going to look like? So that can be an issue with usage. And that actually did end up pushing us back into the subscription. We had a kind of an interesting one there with fair use pricing, where we had subscription up to a certain amount of credits. And then if you went over, we just charged you overages. We all interact with tools that have overages like that, and we pay them as consumers. It is a bear to manage internally at your company. I do not recommend it, but it's an option that's open to you. One other interesting thing is loss leaders as something to think about with your pricing. It's kind of like an upside down pricing strategy that doesn't really make sense, but it does make sense when you look at the whole plan. So let's say you have product A, product B, and product C. They have different perceived values, so like low, medium, very high value. And when you have products like this, a lot of times it goes similarly, where you're purchasing product A with the low value is the early market. Product B would be like the middle market, maybe your small, middle-sized businesses, and then your very high value is purchased by the very high market. What you might want to do is actually set your prices more like this. Instead of 50-50-50 across, you'd set it at 25. Let's say you're actually losing money on this product every time you sell it, but what you lose on this product is less than or equal to what you would spend marketing to that person in order to get them to become a customer. It's actually worth it to you to offer this as a loss leader, especially if you think that those customers are going to eventually become these $100 customers or become the $300 customers. You see this a lot in coffee shops, where You have like one, like drip coffee is like really inexpensive. And then it like goes all the way up to the $8 lavender soy latte because you like get someone to come in and then you, um, upsell them a whole bunch of ways. You also see this a lot. Let's say this isn't 25, let's say it's actually free. You see this with premium products. Premium products are not actually free when you offer them because you still have to provide all the backend support, all the, the product can't go down when, even if it's freemium, right? And sometimes it requires usage or throughput when you have a freemium version of your product. But maybe that's worth it to you because you know that a certain percentage of those freemium customers are going to become your product B and product C customers. So just interesting to think about when you're doing your pricing. And yeah, I think just like the metaphor says here, the learning the levers that are going to come into play with your annual plan, learning the pricing structures, especially the difference between price point, price packaging, price positioning. All of that is really important to setting up the structure foundation of your plan. But how you then apply those things to each one of your individual companies is actually like where the magic comes in and sets a good revenue plan apart from a bad revenue plan. And here's some key takeaways. So we talked about the 7 levers. Let's see if I can do it. We have volume, value, retention rate, and oh my gosh, time. Thank you. Time. Yes. And time. And then we have our 2 cost levers, which are our capacity and our efficiency. I have them on the slide, of course. And then within pricing, we also have the 3 components: price point, price packaging, price positioning. And I would say if you're going to take one key takeaway from the pricing section is this: understand your customer and you will know which right decisions to make with these 3 concepts. We have a bit of time at the end here. If people do have questions, if there are no questions, I will be hanging out and you can come talk to me if you want to. But I really appreciate everybody's attention today. Yeah. Yeah.
Do we have any questions in the audience for everybody or? How will you decide the amount that you have to charge or you want to charge to your first customer?
How do you decide the amount to charge to a first customer? That is the question. It is very hard because your product is hopefully the worst product you will ever offer anyone. And it also costs you more money than hopefully any product ever will. So it's hard to figure out what that price point looks like. My recommendation is usually figure out the price method that you're going to use. So is it that it's you normally that value pricing. So you figured out by talking to your customer what value you're delivering with that price. That's the price. And then you offer the customer, your first customer, let's say an 85% discount from that price. But you let them know what that price is. And then over time, you're going to walk them up towards that price. So let's say your monthly subscription, first 3 months, 85% discount because we recognize you're taking a chance on us. Next 3 months, 50% discount. Next 3 months, 15, and then you're at list price. If you do it the other way and you say, pay me whatever you think, it's actually really hard to walk them back to that list pricing. So I recommend set what you think is your price point first based on talking to the customers, and then anchor that and set a discount for your first pilot customer. Yeah. Although easier said than done. It's a very tough first conversation to have. Yeah. But don't let them steamroll you. I find talking to a lot of student groups, there's a lot of like, what it's going to be. You know how beautiful this product will be someday. And you know that it doesn't look like that today. And so they lowball themselves, basically. Don't lowball yourself. You can actually sell what you have. What you have is probably delivering more value than you think it is, and you should be selling that for money. Anybody else? Yeah.
I have something. Like, I think one place to probably all that is reading the tests very early on. You don't actually know your pricing. you're trying to pick one of these levers and figure that out. They're asking you, like, what are your margins? What are your pricing? What is your price at scale versus your nodes? And where do we start?
Yeah.
Or like, how, is there an appropriate way to answer that question? And it's like, not sure yet, but I'm thinking into X, Y, Z. Is there an easier way to answer that question and like figure it all out?
Yes, absolutely. And I would also say, if you're talking to an investor that doesn't understand that any margin that you're telling them is like,
Yes.
like, then you're talking to the wrong investor. Totally. That's why I mentioned LTV. If anyone asks you for LTV, like, how could you possibly figure that out right now? Like you couldn't, right? So I do think it's an important exercise to go through, like the academic exercise of trying to figure out how to anchor some of these levers in your plan, because it is going to help you at least have like some kind of foundation. I would base most, if not all of that, from your customer interviews. And then, yeah, I would say I don't know is like, in my book, it's completely acceptable at a pre-revenue stage. I'd have some anchors, but when you're thinking about, you brought up margins, and this is where this is taking me in my mind, but margin is really hard because it's the rate between your revenue and your cost, and you don't know either, right? So you've got to have something in order to figure out a margin, but I would project out that set margin maybe like a year into the future, because your margin today, like on your first sale, is going to be completely upside down. And that's not what you want to show investors. So I would say, let's assume we're at scale. Let's assume we have enough capacity to support X amount of revenue. And we think based on our interviews, our price point is set here. Here's where the margins will be in about a year. But yes, don't try to figure out what your margin on your first sale is, because it's not even really relevant, because you don't want that to be a KPI for you.
So you gave the arbitrary numbers on speed, kind of show that we push a thought process.
That's right. Yes.
Based on what we know,
Yeah, I think that's right. And for the really good investors that I've worked with, want to know how you think about it more than they want to know, is the margin 35% or 32%? Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
Thought.
Yeah. Exactly. And don't get too caught up in the first few sales and everything. All of the metrics will be completely upside down in the first few sales. Yeah, absolutely. Also, no one really knows what they're doing. And planning is even with big companies, honestly, planning is sometimes a real shot in the dark, because you don't know what's going to happen. I work in climate tech right now. We're all reading the news. Nobody knows what's going to happen in climate tech, but we still need to annual plan. And so we do the same thing. We talk to our customers, we get the best guess where these metrics can be, and we try and hire the right amount of people. Yeah. All right. Anything else?
One test of scenarios, projection of scenarios, like, okay, we get the
Yep.
pricing model over time, because maybe you have like the customer or investors, it's good to have it for yourself.
Yeah, academic exercise, do it. Absolutely. It's really, and you will get to a point, if you build a model, you'll get to a point where you can make that model say anything you want, right? So understanding what is a good scenario, what's middle, what's a low scenario is actually really helpful. I would say when you're pitching to an investor, it's good to have like, here's what I think is going to happen. Here's my best guess. But for yourself, have that high and low, and maybe they'll ask for it. And if you're prepared when they're asking for it, that's a really great sign. Yeah, but I'd highly recommend it, especially when you're picking like, do I want to go MoMA or do I want to go historical society? The scenario planning is helpful.